Hello, it's Jimmy. I just got back from a week-long trip down to Texas, and I don't have any credit cards. So, how did I do it? I made a plan with a budget, so I knew how much money I was going to spend. I figured out how much cash I needed, and the rest I used a debit card for. I planned the journey at least up through the Airbnb that we stayed at near Palo Duro Canyon in Texas, so I knew where I was going to be staying those first few nights. So that was easy. I could pay for the hotel rooms on the website using my debit card. And in one case, I used PayPal, which then just linked right back to my checking account. It was very easy. Based on some of my previous trips, I knew about how much I was going to spend, what the averages were, figured out the cost of gas based on the fuel economy of the vehicle I was taking. So I felt pretty confident at the amount that the budget would be for this trip. And like I've said previously, the budget's not constraining, it's actually quite freeing, so that I know I'm not going to turn a $2,000 trip into a $5,000 trip. Once I had a plan, at least for the spending portion of the trip, I went to the bank and I got cash out for the food and activities that we would be enjoying. And because I bank with a local bank, I let them know where I'd be traveling to because these people actually care about their customers. So it's nice to let them know in advance what states I'll be traveling to. And that way they can kind of monitor my accounts to make sure there's no strange activity, or at least stranger than what I do with it. One time a few years ago, I did venture out and forgot to tell them that I was going on a trip, and they called me. A human called me on the telephone and asked if I was out traveling and if the past few charges to my debit card were actually mine. They were. It was fine. But it's nice to know that they're looking out for their customers. Planning the trip is half the fun for me. I like knowing what towns I'll be going through and what things are worth taking a look at. I think every town and person you meet along the way has an interesting story to tell, and we were not disappointed with that on this trip. I do tend to stay off of the interstate as much as possible, although it is a much faster route and there are plenty of rest stops and gas stations. It is really not as scenic, especially in the middle of our country. It's kind of plain in areas, but that's how they get the roads to be a little straighter and go faster. I do prefer the US highway system. A lot of them, the speed limit is 65 miles per hour or faster. And I do like it. I like going through the smaller towns and getting to meet the interesting people. The traffic volume is much lower. There are fewer trucks and generally fewer insane drivers. So it makes the experience a little less stressful. This whole trip came in just under $2,000. Not bad for a week of travel, going from a Saturday whole week into the next weekend and coming home on Sunday. All the nights of lodging and food and gas. And we found some interesting artifacts and different things that we enjoy. Magnets, typically, postcards, things like that. It was a rather picturesque journey, at least for the latter half of it, in the southern part of the country. Rather enjoyable. Okay, so how did I pay for all of this since I don't have a credit card? Isn't it true you have to have a credit card to travel anywhere? Well, that's absolutely false. This is not my first rodeo traveling with no credit card. I haven't had one for years and I've traveled all over the place. Well, when I went to the bank, I ordered up all the cash that I thought that I would need for the trip, and I'm not surprised, but nobody refused my cash anywhere. They seemed to like that. I even had an older $20 bill in my pile that I used at a restaurant, and the server was so excited to see this older $20 bill. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to take that and put it in my collection. I've got a bunch of older ones and fives and whatnot, but I don't have a 20." So he was rather pleased with that. Another person that appreciates the history of cash. But it also saved us some money because a lot of places now are charging 3 to 5% to use a credit card or even a debit card to pay for your purchases. So a lot of times, especially at restaurants, when you get your bill, it'll show you a cash price and a card price. Well, we saved probably 3 to 5% on most of our meals that had an option to pay cash. And I leave a tip in the hotel room for the housekeeping staff. I hope you're doing that too, because those poor folks have enough gross things to deal with. I like to spend a couple minutes tidying the room before we leave. I gather all the towels and lay them in one place, usually draped over the tub or somewhere convenient in the bathroom, and then take all of our trash out and put the remote for the TV back. I don't do a complete scrubbing of the room, but at least try to make life a little easier for these folks and don't leave the thing looking like a pigsty. And please leave a tip. I used a debit card for paying for gas. There's all kinds of pumps across the country and never ran into one that didn't have a slot to take the debit card. Hotels, they take debit cards, no problem. Some of them do put about a $50 hold on the card for incidentals or in case you wreck the place, then they can get a little bit more. But I've never had a problem with that. They typically show up as a pending charge when I look online at my account, but they never post that extra amount. It always seems to go away. One time, a few years ago, I did have a hotel fail to return that little extra about 14 days after the trip. Now, there was a notice at the desk that said it could be on there up to that point, 14 days. No problem. I called them up and they took it off. Now, this was several years ago, and I have never had a problem since. And that was a rather economy style hotel, motel. And I typically don't stay in those places anymore. I've moved way up. Now we like to stay at Holiday Inn Express. That's pretty fancy for us. I guess the only thing that I would caution people about is to make sure you leave a little extra dough in whatever account that is attached to that debit card, just for things like that, incidentals, or sometimes you travel and maybe haven't planned out where you're going to stay. And maybe the only hotel you can stay in is a few bucks more than what you've planned for. So having a couple extra bucks in there is a good idea. On the subject of debit cards, I have two because I have two checking accounts. One's my main account that I use for my everyday purchases, and then I have a separate checking account with a debit card that I have set up specifically for travel. As a backstop against fraudulent charges, I only keep enough money or balance in my travel account for a couple of days worth of travel, just in case that number gets compromised somehow. I'm only out a little bit of money, and then I can use my main checking account debit card for the rest of the trip until the bank sorts the problem out. I've never had an issue, but just in case, it's nice to keep those things separate. Because I use mainly cash on my trip, I only use the debit card for paying for gas at the pump and for hotels. And that kind of limits the exposure, so I feel pretty confident going that route. For this particular trip, I drove my own vehicle down, but I have flown to faraway places and rented cars with only my debit card. Now, how does that work? Because most credit cards have some protection in there for renting a car, and of course, most of the major car rental places require a credit card. Well, I've been a customer of Enterprise for 20 years. So they kind of know my habits. They know I don't have a credit card, but I've been a member with them for a long, long time. So I have a history with them, and I've never had an issue using a debit card. When I fly into a city and get a car at the airport, I still have my boarding pass or, the app on the phone. I guess they don't have paper boarding passes anymore to show, hey, I'm coming here, I'm leaving. You're probably going to get your car back. Never had a problem, except one time I did get a little bit of an uppity rental agent. But when the manager came over and probed my history with them, he was satisfied that I was going to return their car, and I got an upgrade from a roller skate to a roller blade, so it worked out pretty nicely for me. A little message to the haters who say I'm stupid for not having a credit card because I'm missing out on all these points and rewards that I could be using to travel with. Well, I retired at the age of 44 and I have no debt, so I can travel where I want, when I want. So if that makes me stupid, there's probably hope for you as well. I don't typically allow my picture to be taken when I'm out traveling. I just think it's a waste of time to get ready and snap the picture. And as you can see, I'm not terribly photogenic, but I did have a splendid time, as can be witnessed here. Well, that's all I've got to say about traveling without a credit card. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you're having a great day.